The medical bay's sterile lights hummed with an eerie constancy, casting pale shadows across the observation window. Behind the reinforced glass, Arya Ven lay motionless, her chest rising and falling in rhythm with the respirator's mechanical breath. Tubes snaked from her arms, monitors beeped in measured intervals, and the faint smell of antiseptic permeated everything. Outside, pressed against the window like stars clustered around a dying sun, were the cubs. Dozens of them. Kishari younglings, apex predators in their infancy, their fur rippling with patterns that shifted between amber and obsidian. Each stood no taller than a human child, but their eyes held the intensity of creatures born to hunt, to dominate, to survive. Yet now, those eyes were fixed on the broken human inside the ICU room, unblinking and filled with something their species rarely showed: concern. Among them, closest to the glass, was Kiro. His small paws were pressed flat against the window, leaving smudges that medical staff had long given up trying to clean. His ears flattened against his skull, his tail hung low, and his breathing came in shallow, anxious puffs that fogged the glass. "She's not waking up," Kiro whispered, his voice cracking in the way only a frightened child's could. The older cubs around him shifted uncomfortably. None of them had words that could fix this. It had been 3 days since the incident. 3 days since the field trip to the human agricultural settlement had gone catastrophically wrong. 3 days since Arya Ven, the human liaison assigned to the Kashari Youth Education Program, had done the impossible. The memory played on a loop in Kiro's mind. They had been touring the grain silos when the structural supports failed, centuries-old metal finally surrendering to corrosion and neglect. The collapse had been sudden, a thunderous roar of twisting metal and cascading debris. Kiro had frozen, his young predator instincts useless against such an incomprehensible threat. Then Arya had moved. Humans weren't supposed to be fast. Every xenobiology text confirmed it. Humans were persistence hunters, slow and steady, built for endurance rather than explosive speed. But in that moment, Arya had been a blur. She had crossed 15 meters in what seemed like a heartbeat, her arms wrapping around Kiro's small frame as she twisted her body between him and the falling tonnage of steel. The impact had been horrific. Even now, Kiro could hear the sound, a wet crunch that shouldn't have come from a living body. Arya had taken the full force of a support beam across her back and shoulders. She had collapsed immediately, her grip on Kiro loosening as consciousness fled. Medical personnel had arrived within minutes. The human colony's emergency response team worked with practiced efficiency, stabilizing Arya's spine, stopping internal bleeding, rushing her to the medical bay. The Keshari younglings had been evacuated, checked for injuries, and returned to their dormitories. But they hadn't stayed there. Within hours, they had begun gathering outside the ICU. At first, it was just Kiro and a handful of others from his cohort. Then more came. Word spread through the youth compound like wildfire. The human had saved one of them. The human had broken herself to protect a predator cub. It defied logic. It defied every survival instinct the galaxy understood. Kishari adults didn't even always protect their own young with such reckless abandon. The species' philosophy was clear: the weak culled themselves, and the strong survived. To throw one's life away for another was weakness. Evolution punished such behavior. Yet Arya Ven had done exactly that. Now, as the cubs maintained their vigil, even the adult Kashari were beginning to notice. Commander Dexra, the military attaché overseeing the youth program, stood at a distance, his battle-scarred muzzle creased with confusion. He watched the younglings with something approaching discomfort. "They've been there for 3 days," his aide murmured. "They barely eat. They refuse to leave." Dextra's claws flexed unconsciously. "It's disturbing, sir." "The human showed weakness," Dextra said, though his voice lacked its usual conviction. "She prioritized another's survival over her own. That is antithetical to strength." The aide hesitated. "Then why do the cubs honor her?" Dextra had no answer. Inside the ICU, Arya's eyelids fluttered. The movement was barely perceptible, but Kiro saw it immediately. His entire body went rigid. "She moved," he barked, his voice cracking between his natural growl and a desperate squeak. "I saw her move." The other cubs pressed closer, a wave of fur and claws and hope. Medical staff rushed into the room, checking monitors, adjusting settings. Through the window, the younglings watched with bated breath. Arya's eyes opened slowly, pupils contracting against the harsh lights. Her gaze was unfocused at first, wandering across the ceiling before finally tracking to the window. She saw them, dozens of young predators, their faces pressed to the glass, watching her with an intensity that would have terrified most humans. But Arya Ven smiled. It was weak, barely more than a slight upturn of her cracked lips, but it was genuine. She tried to lift her hand, managed only a small wave before exhaustion dragged it back down. The gesture was enough. Kiro's tail began to wag, a motion he hadn't realized he was making until another cub pointed it out. Around him, the other younglings released breaths they'd been holding, their tension breaking like a dam giving way. "She's awake," Kiro whispered, pressing his forehead against the glass. "She's going to be okay." A medical technician emerged from the ICU, a human woman with tired eyes and a gentle smile. "She's asking for Kiro," she said, looking directly at the small cub. Kiro's eyes widened. The crowd of younglings parted instinctively, creating a path. He walked forward on shaking legs, following the technician into the sterile room. Arya turned her head slightly as he approached. Speaking was difficult. Her voice came out as barely more than a rasp. "Hey, little one, you okay?" Kiro nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in his throat. "Good," Arya whispered. That's all that matters." "Why?" Kiro finally managed, the word bursting out of him. "Why did you do it? You could have died." "You almost did die." Arya's smile widened slightly. "Because you're worth protecting, Kiro. All of you are. But we're predators. We're strong, you're just human," Arya finished. "Yeah, we're just human. And that's exactly why." Outside the window, dozens of young Kashari continued their vigil, and something fundamental shifted in their understanding of what strength truly meant. The galaxy would have to learn what these cubs already knew. Humans didn't survive because they were the strongest or the fastest. They survived because they decided some things were worth dying for. And that made them the most dangerous species of all.